Call the next meeting to order. We do have a quorum present. City Manager.
So we have 3 items on your agenda tonight, and each one of them could turn out to be fairly lengthy. I'm hoping we can keep each one to no more than an hour. So that will get you out of here in 3 hours. So if one goes a little shorter, then you may be able to reduce. But and the first item you'll notice is posted as a regular session. So we do likely have folks here from Main and Mill that would like to talk with the council about some of the parking issues. So what we'd like to do is start with David, and he'll do an overall review of parking, the proposed changes that we would like to make. And then Chief Curbo will talk to you about enforcement issues. Where is it? There he is. So with that, I'll turn it over to David.
Okay. Go ahead.
We wanted to start out with our overall master parking map for the Old Town area. You've probably seen this map before. We've made some recent changes to it to reflect some of the things that have happened recently. The first thing I wanted to point out was with the townhouse development that's being constructed here behind City Hall on Walter Street, ultimately that parking lot on Walters will be reconfigured. And in doing so, it will have a total of 72 spaces. Right now, I think we're at 81, so that would be a reduction of 9 spaces compared to what we have today. Added I guess it's 42 spaces we've added to this map with the visitor center, which wasn't reflected. And then another thing I wanted to mention was we've got 20 spaces here behind the MCL Grand. We've recently discovered that it was not, and although it was always intended to be public parking when it was not required for the MCL operation, the sign said that it was for the MCL Grand operation only. So we're going to fix that sign so that it's clearly available to the public anytime that the MCL Grand does not have to be using those spaces.
There'll be coordination challenges with that, because if you have like the symphony coming in with large instruments or theater set up, sometimes that can be very difficult and you really need that space to load and unload, but unfortunately it sits empty a lot too, and we don't want that either. So we're going to be working through that and coordinating that carefully with the MCL staff.
And will there be temporary signs then? Temporary signs that can be put up for that?
Yeah, so probably what would happen, Denise will have to better coordinate with the clients to say, okay, you're going to be coming in on this day, you're going to have to load, and so at that point, we'll have to mark it. We may even have some type of, lever across the driveway to prevent people from parking there for certain periods of time. But we've got to work through that. There are some complexities with that, but it will free up some spaces that we need.
I wanted to mention that the parking on Mill and Main Street are based on the proposed improvements that should be under construction early next year. And then we have added the 59 spaces at Witherspoon Distillery based on the agreement that we have with them. Obviously there's some restrictions involved with those parking spaces, but they are available at certain times for public use.
The other one is the Karimi. That is a lease, and I believe that lease ends this year, so that's another issue that we'll need to try to renegotiate. Is that what year? Is it this year, 2017?
Earlier this month, we received this letter from the Main and Mill Association. I'm sure most of you have probably seen it. And there were some specific requests included in that letter. Kind of broke it down into 3 main issues. They're requesting an enforceable 2-hour parking limit along Main Street between Charles and Mill, Church Street, and then for the alley adjacent to the Wayne Ferguson Plaza. They've they were requesting 2 to 3 loading zones in the alley adjacent to Wayne Ferguson Plaza. And then also to be able to load and unload on Main Street in the travel lanes. Staff has been working with the merchants out there in the Main and Mill Association, and we believe that what we're proposing in our ordinance revisions will address all of these issues.
So we think the change with the opening of Valley Ridge makes this loading and unloading on Main Street much more feasible. So you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, the loading zone on Main Street in the travel lanes, first of all, it's going to be there is going to be a time restriction. It will not be allowed during the hours of 7 to 9 and from 4 to 6 on weekdays. Other than those times during the week, it will be open for 20-minute loading and unloading. Some other conditions that will apply to that is that if you have more than one person loading or unloading on Main Street, they cannot block traffic, meaning, we obviously have 2 lanes in one direction, so you can take up one lane, but a second driver can't take up the second lane and not allow traffic to go by. So if there are more than one, they have to be offset enough to where cars can get around them. And of course, it is a 20-minute time limit per loading and unloading. The other minor restriction we have on that is it's not legal to park behind a handicap parking space, and we do have a couple of those on Main Street. So you'll notice when we go through here, we've got a diagram that shows where those parking spaces are located. And we're going to have some specific signage on Main Street to alert people that are loading and unloading that at those 2 particular locations, they just won't be able to do it. We've added a number of proposed changes to the parking ordinance. The first one addresses the 2-hour parking. We're proposing 2-hour parking on the alley adjacent to Wayne Ferguson Plaza. And that would be between the hours of 8 and 5 Monday through Friday. There's a mistake in that it's not Saturday, it should be Friday, so just during the week, and 8 to 5. Also, we're going to propose to do this on Church Street here in front of City Hall, so that'll be added as well in our proposal to provide the 2-hour parking on Church Street for the same time and hours. One thing we'll have to think about as we move forward with our Main and Mill improvements, there may be some places along Main and Mill that we'll want to consider this at some point in the future as well. We've got the 20-minute parking spaces. We've shown, we're proposing all 4 20-minute parking spaces to be located in the alley adjacent to Wayne Ferguson Plaza. And again, that would be Monday through Friday from 8 to 5. We've added a provision in the parking ordinance to preclude overnight parking in city-owned parking lots if they're signed such. So I think we're having some issues with the parking lot at Elm and Mill Street with some people parking overnight there. And so at this point, staff would be proposing to sign that particular parking lot to keep people from parking overnight there that shouldn't be. But we don't have plans to sign anything other than that one parking lot. But what this change in the ordinance allows us to do is if another location becomes a problem in the future, we can always sign it.
Are these the people that are parking there? Are we talking homeless people or?
No, Chief
Just-
Turbo, you want
No, it's typically been vehicles that are in for repair, and so the mechanics across the street will park them on our lot
It's a business.
Okay.
I did notice two 18-wheelers in there,
Oh, have you?
one night last week.
It doesn't surprise me.
Yeah, it's,
What time
This
of
will
the
give us
day did
tea.
you see that?
yeah.
It was around 9 or 10, I think.
PM?
Can I say something real quick? That 20-minute parking, we want that to be always 20
You
minutes.
can speak when you have a speaker card.
Dave, one question on 2-hour parking. Is that gonna be, like when we have Western Days, obviously we expand out to Mill Street. Is it gonna apply on when we have festivals or special events too? Or are we gonna put something in exemption for those?
All of the streets that are included in the 2-hour parking are typically streets that are closed off during those events anyway.
Right now, I understand that, but in the future, you said it may expand out.
Oh, right, on those streets that we might want to look at it later on. You know, we'll have to, that's one of the issues we'll have to work through is, you know, if we've got a festival like Western Days, you know, we may want to suspend that or not. But, you know, given what we're looking at in terms of some of the new development that's going in and the street improvements, you know, I imagine that at some point, you know, there may be some merchants or business owners that might want us to take a look at that.
It's somewhat of a case-by-case basis as we look at the festival setup.
We've added a provision in the proposed ordinance, parking within designated spaces. To make a long story short, basically what this does is says that, you know, you have to park in a parking space. You know, you can't extend out into the sidewalk or out into the street or block somebody's driveway or, you know, take up more than one parking space. You have to be between the lines of the parking space. And then we've got our loading zones that we're adding. We've got 3 loading zones in the alley adjacent to Wayne Ferguson Plaza. And then, of course, we've got the Main Street loading zone that we've already talked about. And again, for these loading zones, as we move forward with Main and Mill, and we start getting more businesses, especially on Mill Street, you know, it'll be something that, you know, will probably come up on that street as well. So it's something we'll want to think about for the future. This map shows some of the loading zones. The yellow loading zones are all the Wayne Ferguson Plaza locations that staff is proposing. We've got one down by the old bank building. We've got one at the opposite end of the alley. And then we've got one in the alley behind the stage at the plaza.
We had wanted to make that one a little closer to the alley, but it can't block those handicap parking spaces, correct, David?
Correct. Yeah, originally we had it drawn all the way down to the end, but then when we realized that we had the handicap spaces there, we had to shorten it. This handicap space doesn't pose any problem for us because there's enough backing room behind it. And then, as I mentioned, we've got 2 handicap spaces on Main Street. So we'll have to come up with a way to make it clear to anybody who's loading or unloading that they have to stay clear of those 2 parking spaces.
How about that crosswalk?
Yeah, that's probably another, obviously we don't want people to pull up in the middle of the crosswalk. So we'll have to sign that as well.
Out of curiosity, those 2 handicap spaces, what are they convenient for as far as handicapped persons?
Which ones? The ones in the front or?
Where are they, usually you think of handicap spaces as being particularly close to a business that handicapped people would frequent.
You mean the 2 behind the stage, correct?
Yeah.
Under the ADA, you have to have a certain number of handicap spaces, and so when we redesigned the plaza, that was the place we chose to put the handicap spaces because they didn't use up any of the spaces so many of the businesses needed. So I think originally they were actually behind Caroline's building in the original design, and those were moved. David, is that correct?
Yes,
Yeah.
that's exactly what happened.
So I can't tell you that there was a lot of thought that, does a certain business need handicap parking? Because you never know. Any business could have a employee that needs that type of parking, so it'd be hard to determine that.
That's not really my point. It's that you have two handicap spaces and the predominance of business is along Main Street, so they're pretty much the two least convenient distances for anybody to walk.
For the most part,
So-
they were
so-
put in with the development of the park, and they're right there. And that was another idea that when you look at the requirements, we weren't, the Main Street's built, and the uses are there, but those two spaces, Councilman was primarily, and the other were primarily to offset the numbers that we had in the east and west lot, plus it would help service Wayne Ferguson Plaza.
So are those spaces available? When are they not available?
They're always available.
Always available.
Yeah, because that's an ADA requirement.
Okay. So even during a festival, how would somebody park there?
Well, during a festival, no, there's no parking by anyone, because it's zoned off, it's fenced off.
Okay.
And again, and it's just like the ones on Main Street, we have to have at least one on each side of the street per block. So, there are some prescribed,
No, it's not, I get the numbers part of it, it's the, this seems ironic to put the handicap spaces less convenient than the non-handicap spaces for access to the businesses on Main Street.
I mean, they're pretty much in the middle.
Well, they're pretty much to the far side of the alley.
Well, those two were meant for the park, for the most part. You can service for employee parking or public parking to the businesses, but this development with this alley and whatnot, those two primarily were for the park. We, again, didn't want to encumber a lot of the parking in the rear of any one particular business, but those two were in the position there to actually do both, try to do both, but mainly the park.
right, and that does, because, we've got our one space on the other side of the alley, and that's our requirement, is to have one space on that side of the alley. Had there not have been the park, then we probably would have had one space on the opposite side of the alley somewhere, and
So
so the
here's-
park required the additional.
Here's why I raised the issue, is that a handicapped person is going to, if available, park in whatever space is closest to their destination. So you have two dedicated handicap spaces that handicapped people may not choose to use because they go, I can park much closer elsewhere. So I'll take up a regular space because I'm closer, and then these sit unoccupied because they can't be used by anybody but handicapped. So that's the drawback of putting handicap spaces away from where the businesses are actually closest. So I'm just saying it's,
I hear what you're saying, that the alternative though is
I think
you
you're
market
backing up into the handicap space now.
Use it for a more limited purpose.
Yeah. It just seems like we kind of satisfied ADA, but didn't really accomplish the goal. So go ahead.
And with that, we get into the enforcement, and I'll turn it over to Chief Kerbo.
Thanks, Dave. And so like you mentioned of the proposed ordinance, what we want to do is use civilians in a couple of unique ways to deal with this. Historically, we've tried to use cops to come down and police the 2-hour parking on Main Street and other parking issues. That's usually on a case-by-case basis. We never get here soon enough to do anything about it. And so we thought we'd try different approaches this way. Now, one of them has to do with using volunteers to enforce handicap parking. That's for another discussion another day. What we're really talking about here for Old Town is creating a civilian parking control officer who would be assigned primarily to police downtown in the Old Town Entertainment District area. It becomes a civil penalty, so it's not really an act that's committed under the Transportation Code right now. It's a civil penalty, and it's done that way so that if a person who gets a citation from this parking control officer wants to appeal it, they can do so. They'll have an opportunity before a civilian hearing officer. City manager can designate any number of hearing officers that they want to. we decided that the city secretary will be that hearing officer. And it's just,
She's so excited.
That was me, y'all.
she doesn't get a robe.
When she wants a robe, she gets a robe.
She can wear her bathrobe. But anyway, she'll administratively adjudicate these violations as they're heard. Once she makes a ruling on that or creates an order saying, whether somebody's liable for that violation, that person can then appeal it to the municipal court. And they gets a brand new trial, so they get a chance to go to the city's court. And it's treated like any other parking citation that would come to the city court, like a police officer would send. Now, we've got some timelines set up in the ordinance where in 45 days after the violation is cited is when the hearing officer can have that hearing. The person who receives that citation, if they don't deal with it within the first 15 days, then we assume that they're going to have a hearing before the hearing officer. And the hearing officer can set up any specific day in the month where they want to hear these cases as those come up. Yeah, I just kind of explained that. We also have a provision built in here where if we have repeated violations, we can actually tow a vehicle. And likewise, we can actually boot the car if we have multiple violations. We don't see that a whole lot in this part of the country, but up north and east, they do that quite often. The fees, they're $100 to $200 except for the handicap parking, which can go up to $500 there. It's my understanding that we're going to request that the parking fee, if you just want to come in and pay it, to be fairly reasonable so that most people will actually do that, so that we don't impose too much of a duty on the hearing officer.
Thank you. So that would come back to you in the fee ordinance. And I looked at Denton, so Denton charges $25 for most of the violations. A couple were at the $50 level, so, but then there's a cost to appeal too, which is another $25. So we'll look at Denton. A couple of the cities already have this in place and use those as well.
The other thing to remember too is that we try to employ these parking control officers. I'm not sure how much people are going to beat our door down and want to apply for that job. We want as many as we can so we can get full coverage for the whole time that we're proposing in the ordinance. But in the meantime, we may still have to supplement with police officers to appear, when somebody calls us and tells us that we have an issue.
Well, Council, if you're supportive of this ordinance tonight, we will probably go in and post that job because it is going to be challenging recruitment, and we will have to hire probably 3 to 5 people to have enough coverage of the hours.
Chief, what about our explorers?
Well,
Or is it because they're a minor, they wouldn't be able to?
I wouldn't be real comfortable with using Explorers for that. If they were, if they were already, you want to have the Explorers up to age 19, I believe. If they were adult, I'd come closer to that. But, I'd just rather not use a minor if we can avoid that.
Okay.
And one thing that a civilian cannot enforce is the handicap parking.
Yeah.
So that can only be enforced by police officers. So that is one exception.
Or a volunteer.
Or a volunteer, yeah, which is so strange to me.
The law doesn't allow a paid civilian to enforce handicap.
An unpaid civilian
Tell them
can
about the
enforce or a police
Constitution
officer. There are some state laws that make no sense.
So what else y'all need on this?
Mayor, that's all we have from a staff perspective, but I think you perhaps have some cards indicating.
Amanda Ferguson, so to speak.
Am I the only speaker?
You are the only speaker,
Okay.
yes. And Carolyn submitted
She can
a
have
card
some of my
in-
time. I'm
in
gonna be
support.
real short.
You're good, okay.
I don't really have anything. I'm gonna make this real short. We've talked about this for a long time now. I'm here to answer any questions you have and then just address a few things that, that y'all just went over, which I think I had already done in an email with some of the staff. But we are in support of the Monday through Friday, 8 to 5, with that revision. That's perfect. The 20-minute parking would be still Monday through Saturday. That we would like still through Saturday for like people trying to get dresses really quick or in and out, people trying to get coffee, because it is still pretty congested down there, as well as loading, like myself example, or Andy's Floral as an example of trying to quick loading on Saturdays. So we'd like to see that continue through Saturday. What else?
Saturday, 8 to 5 or certain hours.
Yeah, 8 to 5 would be suitable. right?
Yeah, I don't think we have anybody.
Let's see, the 18-wheelers, they're there for, what is it, REW? That's what they're there for, they're there every day. They stay overnight, when they get there, because they get there before they open, so that's what that's about. I don't know who pointed that out, but that's
In
exactly
the
what
Elm
that
Street
is.
lot?
Mhm.
Oh.
They park there and then wait, they start lining up. The REW, they're just in line waiting for that lot.
To drop.
And there's 2 to 6 or 7 there at any given time, depending upon what time you hit it in the morning. Let's see, I know there's ongoing efforts to possibly obtain the permit parking spaces that we have by a particular property owner down there. And if they were to say private parking, we'd still like to request, do you have your map?
Yes.
I can show you mine, but it's real tiny. So we would still like to request a loading zone that would come right along next to that, because it still allows these cars to back out and glow and traffic to keep flowing through there. So basically, we would just block these people in for a while.
So Amanda, are you saying all the spaces that are?
No, not, it doesn't have to be all the spaces. I think that if you either centrally locate it or kind of put it down here to one end, it's the milk truck, it's Benny Keith, it's those kind of people that come down here, mainly for the perk right now, and then whoever else would come along the way. But it would not have to be the whole stretch of it. But we'd still like one at this area for them to pull over. Because if you hug those parking spots that are private, then you can still have traffic go through, even the 18-wheelers. If they do it right, you can still allow traffic. And then you also don't block any of these cars, and they can still back out and pull forward.
So we might leave 3 of the spaces if we're able to finalize that negotiation, and then the rest would be loading.
So,
It looks like it's already
I
planned.
thought that was already there, yeah.
Well,
But I'm saying,
yeah.
if you were not to obtain this, like it stays private,
To move it to the
just
center.
push it out to like run right alongside it, because if we do that anyway, if you hug that side where those cars are, and they're not going anywhere, they're there for the day, then it still allows traffic to go through, and it still allows these. So that is, if that stays private permit parking only, just nudge that down a little bit, and we could still use the alleyway. What else?
David,
Handicap spaces are used
You
all
see
the time by
issues with
everybody. I see, if you're down here regularly, like we're down here 40+ hours a week, and they are used, there's turnover in them, they're either using the park, or it does allow pretty decent access if they get out there and then they go through the middle of the plaza, or if they're going to the perk or something along those lines, but they still, I see traffic come and go from there. And I think one of my neighbors has a handicap employee, and so she parks there and goes in the back.
Yeah, the concern would be if they weren't being utilized, because as I said, a handicapped person's supposed to have, they can park where they want. They don't have to park in handicap.
Right.
So
No,
then-
there's traffic constantly throughout there, or I see it on a regular basis. I think that's it. That was it, compared to what y'all presented. Does anybody have any questions? I feel like this is a pretty valid compromise for the last 18 months. I know that there was a lot of disagreements. I know this doesn't take care of a lot of people. Some people are still just not, happy with it, but I feel like this is kind of the best solution for the use that we're trying to offer down here.
The only parking that concerns me, and I'm curious to get, and maybe I just can't visualize it well enough, the blue that you're parking. So let's say one of your customers at We Plus You is there, and they,
I'll just tell you
somebody's
they don't go
parks
there.
right behind them, and even though it's 20 minutes, if I walk out, they just park. I'm like, I got 20 minutes and I can't get out of here till this.
I don't have
That's the
anybody
weird
come
one.
there for me, but I can give you 3 examples of what they do. Caroline's being one, somebody could pull up and they could run a dress out the front door. The armored truck that goes to Frost Bank, they pull up and they do it anyway right now, and they're there probably
Okay.
10 to 20 minutes max, and then LP.
UPS.
Right, well, yes, a lot of times they pull up on the curb in the back, but they do that as well. And then the beer trucks for Elkies pull up and park and unload out front there, and they're doing it anyway right now, on the regular.
And you see that kind of loading zone in a traffic lane in other places. I mean,
You do, in downtown areas, it's
Yeah.
fairly common.
I do it in downtown Dallas all the time when we're trying to load for events. We just pull up and then
Put on the
get everything
flashers and
out
Right.
and then move quickly. Anything else?
Anybody have any questions?
All
I think
the,
it's,
all of the trucks that you named, how many of those are there for 20 minutes?
The beer truck's probably there the longest, or the perk, sometimes in the back, they'll get food deliveries. I would say those would probably be the most, I'm probably a 20-minute user. Andy uses it for at least 20 minutes when we're loading for events. On average, I would say UPS is maybe 10, 15 minutes, depending upon how much they're loading or unloading.
If it's 20 minutes, that
But
guy's out
20
of a job.
minutes seems to get it pretty good.
They're relentless.
You know, sometimes I'll be the one that's guilty of taking longer, just because a lot of times when I'm trying to load, I'll have to move to let somebody through and then have to reposition myself so I can keep loading. So sometimes that, you know, costs me some time or just makes me take up the alley a little bit longer. But usually we're all pretty quick. I mean, we're trying to knock it out and get on our way.
Mayor and Council, I do want to thank Amanda and the Main and Mill for working with us on this. And I know it's been challenging for them also. It affects their businesses, and we want to make sure that we all have the same goal in mind. We want to increase businesses and use of these businesses in Oakland. So I think it is a good compromise.
I agree.
thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody else?
Do
Okay,
we have that
next.
already? Okay. What is the mayor, does he need to close it?
No, I'm just making a note of the comment.
Yes. So the next item are strategies for your Old Town code enforcement. We're really focused on the TOD area from Mill to the rail station. So we want to walk through some of the challenges we have related to redevelopment. And we're going to end with kind of a list of levels of enforcement and change that council could direct. From the least aggressive to the most aggressive. And what we'd like to have is your input and direction tonight about what you might like to see come back to you in the form of the ordinance.
We hand out some handouts. One for each council. Sorry, I had to get all my exhibits straightened up here.
These are the same maps that are in your PowerPoint, but we recognize they were a little small, and so we thought this might be helpful.
Go to slideshow.
All right.
So before I get started, I wanted to let the council know the extent of staff's work on this and my thank yous to all of the different teams that have helped. It really has taken a village to, as, I'm not gonna use that, I was gonna say something Richard says, but it's crude. But really code enforcement. I almost said it, but then I caught myself. But really code enforcement has been crucial to this, building inspection, neighborhood services, IT department, planning, economic development, city secretary's office, legal department, city management office. So this has taken an entire village to create this project, and it's taken a while. So I wanted to start with why we needed an assessment. If you remember back in February when we had our retreat, we talked about the need for an assessment. One of the big changes we had done then is we had moved the enforcement of zoning and development regulations to code enforcement. We wanted to be more proactive in our zoning enforcement, and we did that by putting it in the hands of a team that has beats, just like police officers do. So with having beats, they
basically will be out in their area looking for violations. Before that, they were doing nuisance violations. Nuisance violations are like high grass and weeds, junk vehicles, but now they were looking at something a lot more complex, which is talking about zoning and development regulations. When you have a beat, and the most important part about zoning enforcement is to catch things when things occur. So if you don't have people on the street seeing when changes are occurring, you lose the ability to say, I've witnessed this and I can go to court and prove that there's a change. And we'll go into nonconformity in a little bit and why that's an issue. The other reason we did this is because there were conflicting views internally. Some staff were saying, well, code enforcement just needs to go out there. There's a bunch of junk in Old Town and on these lots. You know, it's not outdoor storage, it's just junk, so get rid of it. And others were saying, no, they have non-conforming rights to outdoor storage, so what was it truly? We wanted to be able to go and do that assessment. Well, identifying non-conformities in properties, it is not just a look on a map and see if it's non-conforming. It is a historical analysis, parcel by parcel. So to be able to look at Old Town and holistically deal with it, we really had to go parcel by parcel. So we took an area, and I'll go through that, but ultimately we were trying to create a strategy for accomplishing our long-term goals with 2025 in Old Town. So this is where we decided to start our assessment. Now, code enforcement now knows how to do this type of assessment, and we plan to continue doing this throughout each of the districts. But as you can see, what we chose was our TOD area, which moved from City Hall down to our transit-oriented development. This was an important area not only because of connectivity to transit and how important that is to City Council and to our citizens, but also because this area has a lot more nonconformities than a lot of the areas in Old Town. So really this is looking at, by looking at this area, we're seeing a lot of the problems that are involved throughout our Old Town area. So there were 165 parcels that we had to do an assessment on. And so code officers basically went out there, well, code and planning, but code went out there and went parcel by parcel and walked every single lot, and these were all the pieces of data that they collected. And we now have a giant spreadsheet that shows all these parcels and the information on each one of them. They then come back, they work together with planning, and planning then had to help with the research and figuring out, okay, what does the certificate of occupancy say? The fire marshal has to help them find what is the fire inspection date and those types of things. So it not only was boots on the ground, but it's then the analysis afterwards. And then when we looked at all that, and we also, our data collection, we also used Google products to centralize the database. So we created this where the code officers could enter in all the information, so at least we can have uniformity of data being added in, and then the idea for that is to then aggregate the data and be able to use it through GIS, which has created the maps that you have today. So what we learned. The first thing we learned was actually, and I didn't put it on here, was actually we were missing some things out in the field. An example is we found a non-conforming use that we knew it was non-conforming, and we could see on an aerial that it was creeping into other properties. Well, aerials are hard to get into evidence, but we also could see that they were purchasing additional property, and when they purchased it and then started operating on those. So those become very easy, or easier to enforce. So one of the things we learned is we were missing things, so we could start enforcement against those, and we have. The other one is voluntary rezoning is slow. So what we wanted to do is look at all the aggregate data and then figure out what trends were there and what was really creating a problem for us accomplishing our goals. One was that the zoning we have a plan we adopted in 2003 that said this is what we want our zoning to look like in Old Town, and our hope was that voluntarily that will all change. And looking at it, we still have a significant amount of light industrial that's still on the ground. The other thing we learned in trying to research it is that we have a lack of historical data. Part of that goes back to what I said, is we didn't have code officers that were on a beat before. We had building inspectors who would get called out as needed for zoning. So if Richard drove by and said, well, I see that there's now a factory in this building that was once an office, I don't think that's allowed, well, then building inspection would come out and write a ticket. But that's just one person happening to see it, whereas now we have people that are on the street. So that because we didn't have beats, we have that lack of data. The other problem with nonconformity, as I talked to you about before, is that it's so necessary to have data, to have historical data, because what you're trying to prove is the day that you started operating, it was illegal, not allowed by right. Well, I need to know exactly when you started operating it, when you changed that use, and if I don't have that data, then it makes it very difficult. Going back to the documentation, we're going to go over problems that we have with our certificate of occupancy process, but that has created problems for us as well. And then also, we have aerial maps, and it's so frustrating because you'll look at aerial maps and you'll see, the outdoor storage, and it might be growing on an aerial map. Aerial maps, though, to be able to get into evidence, you have to authenticate it, and it's difficult when you're using aerial maps from Google Maps or things like that to authenticate it and get it into court. So really, the best evidence you can have is a code officer or someone from the city being able to say, I know what the rules were, and here's that code that applied when you started, and I know you changed from here, and here's the codes that started when you here are the codes that were in place when you started, the new use, and bam, we can win. We don't have a lot of that. And then we found there were 3 primary contour uses to our Old Town plans. And that's in this area. And it's outdoor storage, auto-related uses, and industrial uses in the area. And we'll go over that in more detail about strategies on how to deal with that. And then the other thing we realized is that, and I'll show a map to this as well, is that we do have many projects on the horizon. So it is absolutely possible that we could let the market take care of itself. We are moving in a direction where we're getting more and more interest in Old Town. So we could take a more laissez-faire attitude about it and let the market take care of itself and investment take care of itself. But I just wanted to throw that out there. So I'm going to now unpack each one of these things and go into detail, and I'll point you to the map that we're looking at. Let me get the numbering out here so I can advise you. So the first we talked about was the zoning. So this is what the current zoning is on the property, on all the properties out there. So you'll see that the blue is all light industrial. This is actually is PD, that's why it's in this gray color, but it's actually a PD with an OTMU2 underlined base zoning. So it really, if you want to conceptually think about it, it really should be in pink. But if you can, and then GB is over here. Now, obviously with light industrial, all of these industrial uses could go away, and even worse industrial use could come into these places. Furthermore, if you want to expand your use, it's allowed by right now. So you could continue to expand whatever use you have out there. This is what, in 2003, we adopted. This was what we imagined our Old Town looking like from a zoning perspective. So this was going to be the Old Town Center Business District, these 2 lots over here. And this was all the this was Old Town Center Business, and this was OTMU2. This would limit the light industrial uses on a property, but it also provides greater flexibility with regard to development rights and being able to, it reduces your setbacks and things like that. Any questions about that one? And that map should be 1 and 2. You want to compare them. So other than what is planned for zoning, in each zoning category you have many uses that are allowed. So we broke down the uses then based on the data we had. And as you can see, our current land uses are a patchwork quilt. So we have automotive is going to be in your lighter, what is it? In the darker blue? No, in the teal. In the teal. And you're going to have your storage is going to be in this light blue area. You can kind of get a sense for what's out there. Now, our TOD plan that was adopted by council this year kind of imagines not this patchwork quilt, but a lot more uniformity with regard to residential uses. These are more townhomes. This is coming into multifamily over here. And then the pink would be your mixed-use retail on the corners. So obviously this is significantly different as well. And those are your next 2 after that. So next comes probably the most confusing part of this entire process was learning about our certificate of occupancy process. So this is what our CO looks like right now. And I wanted to kind of go through what our process is. So originally, let me tell you what other people do first. Other cities, and I'm looking at Wayne for this, because he did a survey of our surrounding cities. They use certificate of occupancies for a change in tenant in a building, okay? So any tenant that comes in, you're gonna come in and get a new CO so that we can guarantee that that use, occupancy is right for that building. That also gives a touch point for those city staff people to go in and go, oh yeah, you've not made any more changes or alterations to your building, or you have to establish, let's research, make sure it is a non-conforming use or it's not, or you've changed to a conforming use, which makes you no longer have the ability to go back to a conforming use. This whole assessment. What it is basically saying the building is fit for that particular occupancy. So others do that every time a tenant changes. What we do, and what we originally did, was like other cities. We then moved to a complementary CO process, and I'm not sure the timing of when that happened. We're still researching a lot of this to try to figure out where things changed and where a lot of our COs can be found. But what it says with a complementary CO is if you want to change between different uses inside the type of occupancy under the building code or fire code, we're just going to go ahead and give you a CO if we can just collect your information so we can update our records. We're not going to make you come in and get a new CO. If you can look at, there was another sheet of paper I gave you that looks like this. This is an excerpt from the fire code. And so to give you a more detailed explanation, if you look at, on the page 1, it says business group B. So every time you change from one occupancy to another occupancy, this is our new process, we require you to get a new certificate of occupancy. But if you change between any of these uses inside there, we do not. We basically just collect data when we do a fire inspection. So that's what this is. So if you become a new business goes in there, we just collect data points from you, we keep it in a separate system. Your CO remains with your original use. So now you have data points that are in 2 different locations. So, but if you went from a business group B to a factory group F as an example, you can see the different uses, then we would require a CO. So that's the background information on that. But one of the other things to look at as well on this is the original idea of why we changed to this is because the thought at the time was we want a CO that stays with the building's original issuance. So the building's when it first got issued, a CO. So basically it'll say, okay, the issue date, well, we know that building was built there, so we can go back to those codes to figure out what fire codes apply, what building codes apply, and then we'll get all this other information here. Well, that's fine and dandy, but what you miss along the way, other than knowing what codes you can apply, is where those uses changed along the way. And so let me give you, with regard to nonconformity, let me show you what Wayne has come from, well, he came from Plano, but before that was Prosper, and this was one of their COs. Here, down here, they actually say, any change of ownership requires new CO, they call out the nonconforming structure, was a building constructed prior to annexation, nonconforming use, and they talk about that was prior to annexation. So they've actually established there's a nonconformity on this site, and we don't have that data, which is something we probably can fix if council's interested in that. So that leads us to our issues with nonconformity. Get back to our maps. So I wanted to do, I know this is really dry, I'm going to explain all the differences in nonconformity. Because there's nonconforming uses, there are nonconforming structures, and there are nonconforming sites. And you can have a nonconforming structure with a nonconforming site that have overlapping regulations. It's very confusing. So I'm not going to go into all those details, but basically these are the rules on the far, your right, my left. So basically, it's a use that established legally when it first started. We changed the regulations, it's no longer allowed. But we allow it to continue operation unless they abandon the use for 3 months, and you guys have seen that before, or they change use to a conforming use. So if I decide to go to a conforming use, I don't get my non-conforming use rights back. We do have a process for reinstatement of non-conforming rights. It goes to the Board of Adjustment. And we do, this is one of the things that really has gotten changed. Like if we have a SUP for an auto-related use, well, they want to expand it. we say, no, you need an SUP, or you can't expand. And that gets people coming in for SUPs, or that gets people moving. And you cannot change a non-conforming use to another non-conforming use. So that's the use. And we're looking, when we talk about use, we're talking about what's happening inside this building. We're not talking about what the structure looks like. We're not talking about what the landscaping is on the building. It's purely what that use is. So these are our non-conforming uses in Old Town. And you have a map on that as well. So they're significantly out, and that's not even including the light industrial that are allowed, right? So if we were to change the zoning, there may be even more non-conformities. So non-conforming structure is, we're now looking just at the building itself. So it's a building that was built in accordance with the laws at the time it was built. We then changed the laws, and now it's no longer conforming. We would never let a house be built into that side yard setback, because now we have a new side yard setback requirement, or we'd never allow metal buildings now, but we would require masonry, but it was built before we had our masonry requirements. You're allowed to remodel and expand if in compliance with current regulations, and you go through our engineering site plan process. Your right to rebuild, if it's destroyed by natural causes, if the value for rebuilding is less than 50%, Mr. Wayne Snell can approve that. If it's greater than 50% of value, you have to go to the Board of Adjustment and get approval to rebuild it. And if the structure is abandoned for more than 1 year, it must be brought into compliance prior to being reoccupied. We have not actually enforced that. It's a fairly aggressive standard that we have in our ordinance. We haven't seen a need just yet, but we're having it in our hip pocket. And so these are our non-conforming structures. As you can see, there's many downtown as there are for uses. And then there's non-conforming sites. The site that is no longer, it's the same thing. I don't have to repeat it again. The site was fine when it was in existence, no longer is because of things we've done with our codes. Examples are landscaping, screening, and parking. Those are the big trifecta. And you must, basically, we don't have any rules on this other than saying you must come into conformance when the site is being redeveloped. Those are our non-conforming sites. So these maps right here of nonconformity show you why Old Town is a problem. And let me tell you also, with nonconformity, I'm not putting a stamp on these are absolutely nonconforming. What we're saying is we currently today have not located the documents that make us feel 100% we would win. It doesn't mean we can't later on down the line find the documents and make us feel 100% we can win. But this is being super conservative and saying we feel right now with our tools that we would be hard pressed to be able to make a ironclad case. And these are our specific contrary uses. So we had identified industrial, automotive, storage as the main use, and outdoor and outside storage greater than 10%. The vacant we put on there because we wanted you to be able to see where these uses are close to vacant properties that could be redeveloped. And then, as we talked about earlier about how we do have a lot of projects that are up on the horizon, we could take a very, things are working, we're going in the right direction. And so these are the things that we know or we've heard about coming up that we can actually talk about in an open session. So, we have the Van Reed property over here that we're trying to find a developer on, Old Town Station, Legacy Point. We've got these properties up here that are being developed. This is a new townhome mixed-use development that has been talking to us recently, and we feel like it's moving forward in the next year to purchase and go through the whole site plan process. So that is possible. The other thing to think about is we've got the Main and Mill Streetscape project, so complete streets, but we've also applied for a grant with COG to improve the same level, all of these streets that are going to our DCTA station. So it is very possible just to focus all of your energy on the public sphere and injecting grant money, injecting support that way, and making sure that's done right, and private may follow.
So Old Town Station Apartments and Legacy Point, Richard, what's the status? Just for the council's information.
Legacy Point should start construction on their infrastructure. We just approved their final plat and construction plans. The Old Town Station Apartments, we've just approved their engineering site plan, so they should be going through the building permit process here soon. So I would imagine after the first of the year, we'll see construction activity.
Coming up out of the ground.
Very exciting.
So with this graphic, Donna first saw that, what is this? So I will explain to you what it is. It's just a shadow of a guy. And the whole idea is, the next slide is I'm giving you a menu of opportunities that you want to take. So we can either, continue the hard work that we're doing right now, we can step it up a little bit, or we can go a lot more aggressive. So it's your appetite of what you want to choose from this menu. So here are the options that we are putting forward today. And some of them, especially the ones on the top part, I think we need to do regardless. So the first one is continued public improvements in Old Town. Work on right-of-way landscaping, roadway improvements, continued land banking, and work with developers to develop consistent with our vision. So this is really focusing on what we have in our control, not going out and saying we're government telling you to do something, right? The private sphere to do something. We're working on ourselves and incentivizing. So it's much more the carrot. Then there's outreach and education to properties in the TOD area to try to build partners that also share our vision. I think we've done some of this. I think we can always do more with outreach and education. Third is incentivize Old Town, and we're getting a little bit more aggressive here. Incentivize Old Town relocations elsewhere in our city through economic development. So if you're in Old Town and you're not a use we like, should we help you move out? Perhaps the deal is if you bring a project to us, we also incentivize the part of your move out if you're bringing a new project that's in line with our development ideas. 4 is create areas in city limits where targeted uses, like auto-related uses, may relocate by right rather than SUP. So this is like an incentive through zoning, not through money. So the idea is, and one of our thoughts is, we were talking about creating this Cowan Business District, where we had just recently closed it off from Mill Street. And so is this a possibility that we allow auto-related uses there? I mean, we're going to look at this if this is what council wants us to examine. We allow it by right, but we also put some additional requirements that we would require of any new SUP for auto-related use, like we beef up landscaping requirements. We talk about what your building's going to look like, things like that. Limit outdoor storage, that type of thing. So one of them we were thinking was the Cowan Business District, the North Cowan Business District, but we've also talked about some other locations. I mean, we had talked about out near Holford's Prairie. The Cowan Business District is appealing to us because these people are in Old Town, they have started businesses. They're obviously here because they have customers that come here. So Cowan is very close to Old Town, so it seems palatable for a business owner. So the other one is to require all non-residential buildings at Old Town to get a CO within the next year. Believe it or not, we were not able to find a CO for every building out in Old Town. Many of them are very old. The other problem is because we've had a transition from different systems, that some of that data has gotten lost through the years for COs. Wayne has gone through something very similar with the town of Prosper, where they have a very old area. They didn't have COs. And so what they did was send out a letter to the property owner saying, you have a year, you may have a CO on your wall, just bring it in to us or scan it over to us and we'll just record it. But if not, let us go ahead and give you a CO. We're not looking to throw anyone out, we just want to take a snapshot and get the rights put down on paper that you have. So this is talking about documenting, so it's like, let's get our baseline there. 6, add detailed nonconformity analysis to all new business registrations and COs. I think that's important too. So like Prosper, we want to have something in there that a staff person is literally doing a non-conforming analysis every time they issue a CO. Okay, here's where it gets really, let's go do it. Rezone Old Town to match our land use plan. This would still allow for non-conforming uses to continue operating the way I've described how non-conforming uses operate, but it's going to provide greater predictability for future development. So one of the issues we've seen with developers in Old Town is they come in and they see our plans and they see all of our pictures and they're all excited. They come in and they see that there's a sea of light industrial around their property. And it may be okay today, but they know light industrial could get even worse than this. So why am I going to invest in putting a big project on a corner that is covered or surrounded by light industrial? There's a lack of predictability there. That's a very big process to do. I've been through it in Dallas, and I forgot to thank Karen, because Karen was also instrumental in this. But Karen, in this presentation, I was telling her, I worked for Dallas and we did a lot of non-conforming amortizations there, but we always did the hammer. Dallas is always the hammer. But she's worked for many, many communities where they've done more of the carrot, maybe some hammer, but there's a softer side. And so I wanted her to be here so if you guys had any questions about what that process might look like, you can ask her those questions while she's here. And then, here we go, another one. Amortize commercial outdoor storage as a main use. 3 years, they must get rid of that non-conforming use. So outdoor storage is already non-conforming in Old Town. But this would basically say, if you don't have any other use, if you're just storing, it's a lay-down yard in this area, nothing else, no building, no other use on that property, 3 years. Amortization basically means that you give them enough time to recoup the money that they invested in the property prior to them becoming non-conforming. Well, if you think about it, it's a piece of property, they've not put any investment on a building. That's why this is a lot more aggressive, this is 3 years here. Now, regardless, we will create an appeal process in our ordinance, where they can always come in and bring their financial analysis that shows that they can do time, and we can look at that through that appeal process. And then for those that have main uses on them, this could be an auto-related use, it could be a landscaping use, landscaping company use, anything greater than 10%, 10 years you have to come into full compliance. So those are, I'll show you a map of what that would affect. So all of these that are hatched are 10% or more, because obviously if it's a main use, it's greater than 10%. But the ones that are in blue are ones we feel are storage as the main use on the property. So you can get a sense of how that would affect these properties. So with that, I was going to go into this, but did you want to?
Do you mind doing that last slide, and then
Yeah,
I'm
that's
gonna
fine.
have to take y'all into exec, talk about a few legal issues.
Okay.
If we can get the last slide in.
Yeah, absolutely. And so the last one, which is not really part of the TOD area, but there has been a lot of issues that have come up with regard to enforcement and what the future of the first floor along Main Street is going to be. There has been concern that we're trying to move to retail and to restaurant use in this livable, workable, enjoyable place to walk. But there could be other uses that go in there, like office. And so do office uses, are those contrary to what the ideas we're trying to go for? Specifically, it could be just any office. So what we're considering, we're just giving you this as an FYI that we're looking into this and going to bring back something to you guys with our final recommendation on this. But one thing we're looking at is, should we restrict office completely on the first floor of Main Street? The other one is no
The
high.
existing office would become legal non-conforming.
Right. So with that, exactly, so they become legal non-conforming. With that, they would not be able to expand as a use, but they can continue to operate. If they sell it to the next office user, the office user can do it as well, as long as they don't abandon it for 3 months or more. And then another one is no high-density offices on the first floor, and we would have to look at a person per square foot. This is to avoid call centers that would also impact the parking situation downtown. And then the third,
Sorry, I'm trying to turn this thing off.
the third is to set a percentage of office that is like within the entire area. We would set a boundary and say, okay, we're gonna have this percentage of office allowed on the first floor within this district. And the idea for that is because office still brings a daytime population that can be beneficial to Old Town. It may just not, you may not want to have, a slew of offices right next to each other, or have, 50% of the businesses down there be office. But these are all things we're looking at. We have to assess the impact on the businesses. Obviously, no office on the first floor is going to affect some of the properties that are currently being built as offices. So if we were to adopt it today, they may not be non-conforming, they may be illegal if they just have in the plans an office space. So these are things we're considering, but right now we're really just looking for, where do you want to draw the line? Or do you want to add more lines? I mean, if there's something else that we haven't thought about, let us know what it is. Legal's going to take you guys in executive session. You can come out, you can ask us questions, ask Karen, her experience, questions, and then we'll get some direction from y'all.
Okay. You ready to go into closed session? Okay, we'll now go into closed session.
So council, it might be helpful for Claire has some examples from Dallas, and Karen has some examples from different cities where some of these changes have been implemented, and so I'd kind of like you to hear those stories, if you're interested.
So, one of the ones that I had experience working on was on Ross Avenue, close to the design district. And with that, they had a planned development district that they did for Ross Avenue, basically as a strip coming out of downtown. And the whole idea there was they did not want auto-related uses there. They did not want a lot of the junky storage yards that were out there. So they had, similar to this requirement, was a blanket, if you're an auto-related use, you must cease operating. I think there was maybe 8 years. You must stop operating in 8 years or come into compliance, which was an SUP requirement. In fact, my favorite, my auto repair guy, who was like the most honest and wonderful guy, was one of these guys on Ross Avenue. And I don't know if you've seen it today, it is completely different. So you have a ton of multifamily, high-end multifamily, very urban coffee houses. It's walkable, people live there so they can live close to the design district. It's significantly different. But the process was painful with regard to getting, there were no lawsuits that were brought on that particular PD, but they did have a lot of people come in for appeals. So they would come in, they'd show their financial analysis, and they would say, I need X number of years more, so because I made investments before I became non-conforming. So my car repair guy got an extra 5 years where a lot of other not dealerships, but auto-related uses had to shut down. But by the end of that, he applied for an SUP and said, I really want council, give me the authority to stay here permanently. I have this big following, blah, blah, blah. And council stuck hard and said, you're not in line with the vision for this area. And he actually ended up retiring. So that was kind of the experience there. Now, was it the best idea? Was it great for him? But that area did change significantly. And I'll tell you, other auto-related uses did move. He just happened to be at the end of his career and he wanted to retire and didn't think he had it in him to start a new dealership, or keep saying dealership, auto repair shop. But a lot of the other ones just moved locations. So another one that I dealt with, which was a lot uglier, but I don't foresee it being this situation, because we're looking at businesses, was a mobile home park that was targeted by the city of Dallas, and it was in East Dallas, close to Ferguson Road, close to your family's road. Anyway, they amortized this use and found that there had been no investment. It was just a bunch of mobile homes out there. But then there had been all these people that were very, lower income home families that had to relocate, and we had meetings and appeals, and it was very not. I mean, I got called many names in meetings. So anyway, those were some of my experiences. I know on Fort Worth Avenue in Dallas, this was before my time, they also had like used car dealerships, so they limited those. Frisco, I was not, actually I was part of it with Prosper too. There were some uses that Exide was one for Frisco. I wasn't there during the time, but what they did there was they tried to amortize it. They got a lawsuit and then they settled it for big bucks. So it's an ugly process. All of these transition periods are. So I wanted to let you know that, but there is success in the end of a lot of them. And actually all of them, there have been success that I've worked on. So you want to talk about yours?
Well, I would just to add to that a little bit, in terms particularly the issue where you've got a list here of possible options or possible things to do, and really many of these are additive, and they really can work together. So it's not like you have to pick, one or the other out of that listing. And I say that in part because each dynamic has more nuances than just the fact of, what's the use and what's the, setback and so forth. So for example, the item about rezoning Old Town to match the land use plan and then creating non-conforming uses, I think when at the retreat, when we talked a little bit about this, I think I was telling you about the examples in Richardson, where they have issues with auto-related uses as well. The city in, I want to say about 2003, put in a change in the zoning related to auto uses and gave them a period of time to amortize or to come into compliance. It was, from what I understand, it was not handled particularly well, and so there was a great deal of animosity. And so every single time any one of those businesses was dealing with the city, there was something where they were angry. When we started looking at the Main Street Central redevelopment and reinvestment, the city and the community created a vision that everyone bought into. And so when we got to the questions of the auto-related uses, there were a couple of new dynamics to add on to that base of sort of past unhappiness. And part of that was rezoning towards something that has a higher economic value. So in that case, and I would imagine that in some of these cases here, the uses that you would like to see, that kind of mixed use, that's going to have a higher value than some of those older outdoor storage or industrial or some of those things. And so by changing that zoning, not only do you make it easier for a person who wants to do that kind of development, because they don't have to come in and they don't have to do the zoning process themselves, you've done it for them, but it also is advantageous for the property owner because the value of the property goes up because there is more value potential by having something that there's a market for and that's a higher value kind of a use. And so, the person who retired from the business in Richardson, there were many cases where people would say, well, what you're talking about, that's not the business I've had here for the last 30 years, but I can see why that would be good for the community, and I'm at about the point where I'm going to be retiring, and this will give me more value when I go to sell. So there's that kind of a dynamic that can work in that option of the rezoning that does create non-conforming uses, but it also has that positive side, and the positive really goes towards the things that you want to encourage. So I think that's an important component of that. Now, when you do a rezoning like that, it does create non-conformities, and as Claire did a really nice job of walking you through the uses, the structures, and the sites. And so there are issues that will come up in each one of those. And so I think at that point, the important thing is to really look at what's critical, what's appropriate, how difficult is each one of these things, because if it's something that isn't going to really make a huge difference to your development, it may not be worth having the huge fight or the huge lawsuit or what have you. But on some things, it is very important that you be able to do it. And there may be some places where you have some flexibility. I think the idea of looking at the amortization and looking at the timelines for that in a way that's responsive to the characteristics of the uses, the level of investment that's already there, the time of some of that investment. One of the things to look at is, what's the value of the land versus the value of the improvements on the land. If the improvement value is a small percentage, that probably tells you that those improvements are pretty much past their useful life, and the person who owns the property will have some benefit in doing something different or in selling for something to be different. So that situation may make a lot more sense to look at the rezoning, look at amortizing something, rather than somebody who just built a new building yesterday and who's going to really have a lot of money into the deal and who's going to be very much less willing to cooperate with you on any of the things that you're trying to accomplish. So, I think when I come back, as Claire and I were talking about the analysis that's been done and the options here for you, I think one of the most valuable things is to really look at the range of different choices and really tailor and fine-tune your approach in a way that's going to get you the results that you want and only create controversies or objections where it really is important to what you're trying to achieve, and not just kind of a blanket. I mean, it's not the hammer. I guess that's the difference that I would say is not just the hammer everybody equally, but really look at the things that are critical, that are going to that are going to really have a negative impact if they stay the way they are, or where removing that barrier could have a really positive impact. With all the new business that you're seeing in Old Town, the more that you can do to spur that and enhance that momentum, that's really, I think, a worthwhile thing to do.
So Karen, as a first step in that process, would something like the small area plan process that we've been following in other areas of the city be somewhat of a first step here, so we can go out and start with the outreach and education?
I think that's one part of it. I think you're actually a few steps ahead of that for Old Town, just because you already have the zoning in place. You've already got some partnerships and organizations out there that are also looking to see the kind of revitalization that you're doing. So I think you're probably starting a few steps down the road than what we're working on in those small areas. But I think that kind of a process of engaging people, looking at that outreach and education for folks, that's an important step to take no matter what else you do. I think that the idea that, as Claire described, in terms of looking at relocations elsewhere in the city can really go a long ways. The dynamic is so different if you're saying, we just don't want you anymore, and people will come and say, I've been a loyal, Louisville business for 40 years, and I paid my taxes, and my customers live here, and they've got to go fix their car somewhere. All those dynamics is very different than if you say, well, Old Town is changing. We're looking at different kinds of uses in Old Town, but we're also identifying a place that we think is going to work even better for you and your business, and we're going to help with these kinds of incentives, or we're going to try to create something where maybe there's some synergy of those. And that North Cowan area, we haven't looked at it in detail yet, but that kind of a concept, that might make sense in an area like that. Then it's a very different dynamic for those businesses, because you're not just trying to shut them out altogether.
Claire, when did you guys in Dallas start that process on Ross?
Gosh, that was my I'm trying to remember when I graduated. I think it was probably 2000. I think it was about 2004 or 5.
Okay, because Dallas ISD is a victim of because we've been moved out. But when I got here in 2010ish, I've been down Ross, and the cars were still there. But as I worked there over the last 2 years, they put up at least 2 projects. There's a building that's going up on the corner on Ross and I can't remember the street. But I just say that to say that the market is so hot over there right now that it is building up. So I can see the future of that, and I'm all on board with that amortization to give the folks time, give them an opportunity to protest and go back and forth, but we offer them a place to move, and that may help to incentivize them. But I've seen what is done on Ross, and Ross is completely changed. It's not walkable. It's still like a hike because the streets aren't worth anything, but it is definitely.
But it's a big difference from what it used to be. It's very, very
And I
different.
only worked there 2 years, and all that happened within 2 years.
And with all of the uses that you're seeing now in Old Town, you're getting that market, you're getting that momentum coming in here. I think taking advantage of that and building on that and trying to encourage it through these kinds of techniques makes a lot of sense to continue that vitality.
Okay. Any other? What do we need to do on this?
Well, any other direction you might have, if there's some of these options that in council's opinion are just off the table, we probably want to hear that tonight, or at a future meeting. You don't have to, we've given you a lot of information tonight, and so if you would like to have some additional time to think about it, and we can perhaps bring back some more specifics, actions on certain targeted areas, if that would be a benefit to the council. But if there's certainly issues that you think are off the table, I'd like to hear that tonight.
What particular points are you looking at right now?
So we're looking at that particular TOD area in next steps, and that's anything from, we're not going to do anything, let market drive it. Nika's working on grants. We're working with the COG, so we have land banking grant application, as well as streetscaping application that we're hoping to hear from them Yeah, by end of the year,
Is
so.
that from COG?
That, from the COG, and so that will inform you as to some additional funds that the city would have to help move that process forward
Okay.
as far as land banking.
Neil, you got anything?
Well, to answer the first question, I would like to have a little more time to do a little research into some of this. I know that I have some questions I think I would like to ask Karen, but maybe not right at this moment. Or at least find out a little bit from some other cities. In general, I would tell you, nothing on the list is off the table at this moment. As you know, I'm a big proponent of amortization, have been for every day I've been on city council, so that's not new. The question I might have, but I don't want to try to answer it now, is particularly on number 8, the time frame. Whether that's reasonable, overly aggressive. I can't imagine it being shorter, but I don't know. So, that's one area I'd like to dig into a little further. But otherwise, I would like a little bit of, I'd like to have started this 6 years ago, but, when you start it, you want to start it correctly. So there's this desire to get going as soon as possible, and items like rezoning Old Town is just, to me, is a given. Why wait? I think it's just a given. But to come up with a comprehensive plan that I think balances what we're looking for against, with the impacts to business, I'd like a little more time to think it all through.
Certainly an issue we could bring back to you at retreat. We would have more time to really dig into some of the issues.
Okay. Bob, you have anything?
There's nothing up there that I would take out, so. Yeah, I wanna get Old Town for rezoning and getting it, moving us forward.
TJ?
So we put in place the land use plan in 03, 04? 03. Okay, it's 2017 now, so that's 14 years. In those 14 years, what percentage has moved?
Do you have the historical on that?
15%.
Yeah, we put in place a land use plan, we said we want it to get to this, we hope the market takes care of it, and we've had 14 years, and how much has the market changed? How many of those properties have converted?
You're asking, I think there are two questions. So one is the rezoning have voluntary rezoning have happened, which is because we waive fees for rezoning, so we've been encouraging it that way. Rezoning, I would say a quarter have rezoned voluntarily. It's a different question in terms of what has market done. I think market has done, market plus a lot of economic development incentives and going after it to really market the downtown has done a lot in the past 4 years. I think we've moved the market by 50% over the last 5 years.
So-
You can see some of the bigger chunks.
You can see some of the bigger
So
chunks.
that includes city purchasing property and then some of the economic development incentives and bringing new developers for residential, so that, and again, that's a little different.
Right, because
questions,
we're seeding the market, so regardless, it's a ridiculously low number that the market has
Over
done.
14 years.
Right, over 15 years. So, do we wanna go another 45 years to get 100%?
I plan on still being alive.
I'm planning on, yeah, but I'd rather see it sooner than later.
Easy for you
I
to
would
say.
ask you, TJ, what would you do different?
Well, to me, the amortization tool is a good one.
But if the market's not there, what difference does the tool make?
So we shouldn't have done any of the,
I'm just saying, what would you do different?
what would I do different if the market's not there?
You had the same circumstance. You had the downturn in 06, 07, and 08. You were still having a carryover from the 90s.
Right.
City Hall being built down here was the first major thing
Sure.
down here. So what could have been done different to have any more or better or more value?
Well, I think the proof is more economic development, marketing, and, because we didn't do a lot of those things at the beginning of this. We built City Hall and said, come to Mecca.
There was quite a bit of stuff going on, because you gotta remember where we were.
Sure. Sure,
Yeah,
and I
there
don't
wasn't much
have
here.
that institutional knowledge, you
Yeah,
do.
there wasn't much here.
Yeah.
Facade improvements, probably.
But when I look at what has changed in my time, my impression is that the stuff that's changed the fastest has had significant city involvement.
Since the late 90s,
Yeah.
when this started.
So if we want just the market to do the change, I just, the track record shows that just the market by itself doesn't make the change.
Agreed.
Okay. So that's, and then I had another question was, items 3 and 4. On the punch list.
No good season.
Yeah, 3 and 4. I like the SUPs. I like them. I know that they cause more work, but I think they give us a little bit more of a,
It's been very
it's a
impactful.
good relationship at that point. There's a conversation, it's a discussion, and it works. I feel like these two overlap. I mean, why wouldn't you just do number 3 and keep SUPs? Why would you want to open up a whole area to not needing an SUP?
It just takes out barriers to entry for them. So if you're a business owner and I'm like, well, I know I have to go through it could be 3-month, 4-month process of going through with staff and then go, that's time consuming, it's money for me, whereas I know I have a ready-made
And it
location.
creates uncertainty for that person on their business investment because they know that there's this additional process that they're gonna have to go through. And even though they think it's likely that they'll get it, they don't know that for sure until they get done with it. Part of the idea here is that it's not just that you quit doing SUPs in general, broadly, but that you'd say, in this area, we're wanting to support, let's say, the auto uses.
Sure.
Okay, so you have an area that's all gonna be that kind of use. So some of those things that you are generally concerned about for SUP elsewhere might not be relevant there. You just look at that area for a different sort of character, and then if you don't need to add that process of the SUP, it helps the business owner as well as, getting an area that's gonna be workable.
Could you create a pre-approval for an area, a pre-approved SUP?
Certain standards that need to be met, like an overlay district.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, well, and if you're talking about doing this with some kind of economic incentives or assistance on relocation or something, you could certainly build into that. If there's some particular standards, I don't know, parking or landscaping or something of that kind, where it would apply everywhere. And then it would still avoid the problem of each individual owner having to come through that process.
I think I'd like to explore more of that. If we would have to approve it as council, I would imagine, but of something to the effect that if you were gonna do this type of usage in this prescribed area, council would be amenable to that.
Yeah.
And it would be an SUP, but you wouldn't have to go through a 3-month process.
Yeah. There's, of course, lots of variations between those different items as to exactly the details of those.
I like the control that the SUP gives us. I think that if we're gonna do it, let's be consistent. Now I've created a whole new split zone, right? Where I've given these guys, now they get an exception, and now I've got a whole new line item to put on those COs.
And I guess I would say, Clara, you may see it differently, but to me, if council is open to further investigation of these, one of the things for the staff would be to come back and say, well, here's what we think that area might be like, here's what we think some of those standards might need to be, here's how we do or don't think it'll be necessary to go one by one with an SUP.
Absolutely.
7 may be a little too far for me right now, but 8 and 9 I'm okay with, so I don't know if that means anything.
Okay. Brandon?
Actually, I'm good with 7, because it's a long road from start to finish. I mean, and it's not like we're gonna do this next year. It gives folks time to adjust and maybe say, okay, well, I can sell it, and mostly the developers, I think, is what I'm thinking about. If we're gonna get to what this plan that we would like to see, we gotta start sometime. I'm fine with that. I guess we just need more detail on how we get there. But I think we gotta start now to get 2030, you know.
I think number 7 would actually be a benefit to the owners because we're rezoning it, we're getting it done for them, so then they're able to see, okay, now how can I sell my property? And it makes it a lot easier versus going, okay, I gotta go through this process of rezoning, what can I do, what is it gonna give me to sell it?
Exactly.
Now they know it's been rezoned for me, I can go out and sell it as this. I think we've just helped the owners.
And that, not only are you helping them from the standpoint of you've done that for them, but also I would guess that there's gonna be a wider range of alternative uses that would be available to them. Probably less of the industrial kind, but more of other kinds of commercial or residential or what have you. So you're actually broadening their possibilities.
So, yeah, there's nothing on there that I would take off. I think all of them are feasible and work, and I think it's all going in the right direction. I agree with Neil, though, I need to think about it more on the years for 8 and 9. I don't know if those are good, bad, or, I'm not sure about that. But other than that, I mean, I think everything there is headed in the right direction.
Well, I think with 8 and 9, you did say that those would be case by case. You have to look at the facts on the ground. You have to see how long they own the property for, what's the value.
Yeah, that's where we may have to study it. Is 3 years seems short to me, but if it's 3 years, but you're gonna get 3 more because of the, so maybe that's the right length.
And just to give you some comparisons to other cities, so 10 years it's pretty standard for a lot of ordinances. The 3 years is really aggressive. So the only reason that 3 years was suggested there was because we're talking about, and honestly, I just put 3 years there, was because I thought with no investment in the property that it was defensible. But usually you would see 8 to 10 years. I've seen 5 as well, 5 to 10 years on ordinances out there. So that's all. I mean, we can bring that back at retreat, show you what other people are doing. It's not a problem.
Yeah, you're looking at it as raw dirt versus something that's been built out.
Like one of the lay-down yards.
Yeah, there.
Yeah.
For the certificate of occupancy, you're trying to, on a requirement, how many of those, because what percentage, I guess, do you have now? Because I know you said there are a lot missing.
We do not right now.
Oh, okay.
So we are piecing that together. We have locations that some of them are, the city secretary's office has them off-site, hard copies. We have some that are in a HTE system, which is our previous system, that we have to actually get a software fix to be able to recreate some of these because there has been some problem with one of our servers on that. And then we've got our ones that we're currently doing that are in Laserfish through New World. So it's a quagmire. That's why regardless, our plan is to get a fix to HTE. Our plan is to go out and get city secretary office COs, collect all that data, and then hopefully send out a letter to, if that's the interest of council, send letters out to the Old Town. Because to me, with nonconformity issues in Old Town, it's more important than anywhere else for us to really get a handle on what's out there. But this process will inform how we do everything else in the city. So talking to Wayne, he's like, going forward, we're gonna, we can try to fix things in the past. Doing it citywide will inundate us, but we're gonna just fix it along the way and start making it right.
Okay. I had 3 things that over the last few years. Number 1 was getting what's now Medical City of Louisville to stay here, because they were real close to just abandoning it and moving on. And it was about the same time we set up the Old Town TIF. If they hadn't done it, we wouldn't have had any money anyway to do any of this stuff. The second deal was 35 construction, which is now pretty much wrapped up. For y'all, the ones that don't drive it every day, it's dramatically different. From LBJ all the way to Mayhill Road in Denton, then it gets terrible again. Because of buckets.
That's Denton's problem.
It is. I don't go that way anyway. But, the third thing, it's about as small a level as you can get. But when we have big events down here, we got pay to park, and we have valet services. That was what I was calling, we were getting real close to having a success down here when parking became a problem. Because before, we didn't have a problem with parking. We could just park over in what's now the townhouses being built across the street. And we'd fill up anything we had and have an elephant and a camel over there ride too. And that's been there a long time. But those three things have really brought this area back. The highway probably is the biggest deal, with a public investment of $1.8 billion.
So Mayor, what I'm hearing is that we need to bring this item back to retreat. And we'll look at more specifics and some specific targeted steps for certain areas, and we'll just talk through it again.
Okay.
And that all of these are on the table.
And then, yeah, that was the key that we needed to
Okay.
understand.
Okay. What do we have next?
Do you need
So
these back?
speaking, sir,
Do you need these back?
you can keep those. Our next item on the agenda, since the mayor has now mentioned I-35, is I-35. And this is the overlay district. You saw it at retreat. You had some concerns about some of the administrative steps in the process. We've gone back and we've refined those steps. And so we'd just like to walk through this with you again. Changing the guard here.
I'll go ahead and say I was doubting the Fox Avenue Bridge, but it's very nice now.
Beautiful, isn't it?
It took a long time,
But it's nice.
but yes.
It's really
And
nice.
seems like it's not going up as high as the 35 over Beltline, but it's getting on
I'm
up
okay
there.
with that.
I am too. It took me a few days.
My ears pop going over the line now.
Yeah.
Nikki, you're on.
Okay.
And Richard.
Thank you. For Mayor and Council, I think you're gonna be getting a little tired of hearing about this overlay district, but hopefully this is the last time before adoption that we're gonna talk about it. But we wanted to refresh everybody's kind of memory about I-35 and where we've been and why we tried to do this overlay district and the redevelopment plan as a whole. So the whole idea for the I-35 corridor redevelopment plan was to create a sustainable development, sustainable area along I-35, that we wanted to have quality of development that has high value at the time of development and keeps its value over time. So it timeless aesthetic quality with low maintenance, and the whole idea is for economic development and growing our tax base. Because I-35 is a major corridor and huge asset to Louisville. And we need to keep that tax base and make sure that projects that are coming along I-35 is something that is going to be producing for us in the next 100 years. And of course, the best thing when you have that type of a development is adaptive reuse, because that means if a use goes out of the business, that particular property can be reused very quickly for another very similar use, or even if it's a different use, it still can accommodate that building and that site. So we, of course, we wanted to encourage the market, what's available in the market, and have a placemaking strategy. Basically, again, changing that character of I-35 as you're coming through Louisville. And the other thing that Claire brought up, and of course Karen mentioned, is that predictability, that adjacency predictability. So when we have a development making a lot of investment to have something very creative and again tax producing happen, they want to know right next door to them similar project is going to come in. So they don't want to have that unpredictability of what's going to be next to them. So I don't want to go through this. You've seen it. This is our current condition that we're trying to change. And so the overview of the ordinance Richard is going to go more through the details of the ordinance. This is, of course, something that you saw at the retreat last February. it's funny how long has passed since then, but we've been working through a lot of details, a lot with the city attorney's office, so I really want to thank them. Liz and Lauren have been a huge help to us in terms of really catching the details that we need within this ordinance. What we're going to go through is overview of the vision. We have illustrative plans and framework plans and the difference between them. The non-conforming sites, which is, I think by now we're all versed on non-conformity, the process and administration of this ordinance, and the development standards for the core sections and for the transition sections. If you remember, we have the difference and we have a map that will show that. So basically, this is the overlay that's going to be, the area that you see is where we're going to place the overlay on top of the existing zoning of I-35. So nobody's going to change their zoning. Zoning is going to stay in place. Now, that would be discussion for another day for change of zoning. But in this case, this overlay district and requirement, these are development standards that are going to be placed on top of that existing zoning. So the uses will remain the same in terms of you still have the right to those uses under the current ordinance. So we have our gateways, basically, what we call our core areas, where we have more substantial land for redevelopment, and then you have the transition between those core areas. And the core sub-districts are Northern Gateway, which is where we have the majority of the vacant land across from the lake. We have the Main Street area, where the hospital and primarily all the areas along in conjunction with that. We have the Central District, where we have the older shopping centers. That's a huge landmass that at some point where 121 and I-35 come together can be developed. Of course, we have Southern Gateway, where the mall is primarily, and then in between are the transition districts. So if you remember, this was one of the part of the very beginning of the redevelopment plan where the council at that time decided, yes, we want these nodes to be more intensified. We want these nodes to create something. So these areas that you see, the development is coming up the ground. So you would have taller buildings, more density of development, and areas where people are really encouraged to pull off the highway instead of just driving through Louisville. Would be areas that you pull up and actually be in Louisville and want to do things in Louisville. So that's the whole premise of creating this interconnected, networked areas that we could really have some substantial development, make those nodes more walkable, more mixed use, more something, a place that you want to be actually. And then the transition sub-districts would allow for connection between those two nodes primarily. So we would have better streetscaping, better landscaping, sidewalk connections, more facade improvements, so buildings would have that continuity of facades, so not, basically the material requirements would primarily be consistent along the corridor. That doesn't mean everything is going to look the same. It just means that you will have certain standards that everybody has to meet. And then, of course, we want to align our ED incentive policy with the redevelopment, so you have, again, that encouraged you want to drive the market pretty much, because as you said, Councilman Gilmore, if you wait for the market, sometimes it's just you have to wait and wait and wait. So this development ordinance together with ED incentives would really make that I-35 corridor redevelop at a much faster time than if we were not doing any of these, basically. Putting them together will help a lot. So we have, I just wanted to briefly go over these just because they are extremely important as part of this planning process. One of the things we've done as part of this corridor overlay is that we want to make it a lot more easy to understand for the layperson as well as for our staff, because this is going to be something very different for our staff. Every week that they go to the DRC on Wednesdays, they need to be able to explain to all the applicants what we're trying to achieve and how we're going to achieve it. So we didn't want it to be vague. So with that, we wanted to have a lot of illustrations, so you would actually, pictures worth 1,000 words, so we can just point to it. You see this is kind of what we need to see, or what we'd like to see in this area. Well, the illustrative plans are not regulatory. So when we show how this area can redevelop, this is primarily one way of redeveloping this area with the elements that we have in the ordinance, but not necessarily making that developer or that applicant that comes in do exactly what they see here. But at least this gives them an idea of what to do when they go back with their own architect and planners to plan for the area.
a good example.
It's a good example and it shows the character actually that you're trying to create. We have a framework plan which concentrates more on our infrastructure, and that would set the framework for that development, and that is regulatory. So like, you know, where your drivers are going to be, if you have a new street coming in, where it needs to be connected, primary pedestrian street, major open spaces. So some of those things are going to be regulatory, and if that's going to change, it's going to have to come back to you for change. So it would be an amendment to the ordinance if they want to change our regulatory plan, regulatory framework. And then, of course, with that, Richard is going to go through the applicability of the ordinance. And one of the main things that came up, of course, at the retreat was the approval process. So we have made some changes based on your comments at the retreat, and hopefully this one will be more acceptable. So, you know, it's approved by legal, so there.
Well, this ordinance would will apply to, you know, pretty much all new construction or anyone that's redeveloping an existing site. And the ordinance has been laid out to include an applicability matrix. So there's going to be a vast variety of different situations. So to be helpful to the development community, we worked with legal and our consultants to put this matrix together that identifies the most likely scenarios so that they will know if the entire ordinance applies or if it does not apply at all, like it does in the left-hand column, or in the right-hand column, some of them applies. And you can see, depending on the situation or the investment, different requirements you're going to kick in. So this gives them a little bit of a snapshot before they move forward with a project.
Can I interrupt for a sec?
Sure.
In the ordinance itself, the matrix is more helpful. Like it actually has all the categories and the check marks, so
Yeah.
that you don't have to wonder which sections apply,
Yeah.
where it says some sections.
This is a small snapshot. It's actually a very large fold-out with many different columns, like I said, again, to help the developers and the design professionals that are helping them to understand early on. And this is the part that we've worked on since the retreat, and it's the process or the approval process. Everyone will have to submit an application, and it's either going to be in the form of an engineering site plan or a concept plan if it's more than 5 acres. And if it meets all of the requirements applicable to that situation, it could be a staff approval. And that's very similar to what we do now in our land development regulations with our engineering site plan process. The difference now is going to be that staff's going to have a little bit of authority for some deviations from the regulations, and that's in the form of administrative modifications. And that would be up to a 10% measurable, so that's still there on that left-hand side. Anything above 10% then will go down the middle column, and that is going to, any of those modifications to the standards would have to be approved by our overlay district board, and that is going to be the P&Z. It'll be a different hat that they will wear, and any appeals to their decision would have to go to city council. Now, anything beyond 60% would have to go to the overlay district board for a recommendation, and then on to city council. So we will try to, work with a lot of folks and come up with win-win situations, but again, every situation is different, and so there's kind of 3 different pathways depending on, what the situation is and what applicable standards apply. And again, just an overview, almost every project will have to submit an engineering site plan or a concept plan. The concept plan would be required if the site is more than 5 acres, or if it's part of a larger development without out parcels or pad sites. A new concept plan will not be required if the site had been previously approved through a PD ordinance. That PD ordinance would still be in effect. Now, the regulations of the overlay would kick in if they choose to amend their original PD. And all these requirements would kick in at that time. Also, any use that requires an SUP would also have to follow the requirements of the overlay. And again, on the approval authority, again, staff would approve anything that comes forward and meets all of the requirements. Administrative modifications, we would be given authority up to 10%. And again, we would be looking at, in those areas to accommodate a site-specific condition, which we think would be very, very common because a lot of the redevelopment is constrained by what's on the site. And it could be topography or vegetation, easements. Also could, to provide any required pedestrian or bicycle or transit improvements that would be essential to the site, or a phased redevelopment over time. Those are all things that staff can take a look at the big picture to see if it's appropriate for that site and could approve that.
So on bullet 2, so I'm within 10% of 17 numerical standards. Does that come to council or is that staying with you?
Say that one more time.
I'm asking for 9% differences in 17 numerical standards.
Yes, that stays with staff.
Stays with staff.
Right now, some good examples of what we're kind of similar is our Old Town Development sign ordinance. Several years back when that was approved, council granted the Old Town Design Review Committee the authority to approve modifications. I believe previous to that, every modification had to come to council. It built in a lot of time. Now, for I guess about the last 3 or 4 years, the development community has more of a streamlined process. They can usually get an answer within a week, and the Old Town Design Review Committee has taken that role very, very seriously and have denied a few or have tried to work for some really good solutions. The second example is our interim ordinance that's in our land development standards is the interim I-35 ordinance, and it grants staff a 15% authority for landscaping and parking, and that has been a very good tool as well to help the business owners that have been impacted by the widening and the right-of-way tags.
And still, the second example is still a constrained decision area, right? Mm-hmm. Landscaping and parking. The first example I actually like, where it goes to a review board and doesn't necessarily escalate to council. Right. So, this is why I asked the question in the first place. Is I mean, how much? And I don't know if we never get a good answer on this, but if I'm asking for 10% in all sorts of different ways, all of a sudden I've got a significantly different product, or could, theoretically.
So the areas that you're looking at primarily is basically landscaping, facades, so material, parking, and
Or building placement, setbacks.
So those are, within that 10%, it's very limited of what can happen. Beyond that 10%, and that's why it's limited to, but that's why we reduced it from existing 15% to 10%, because the movement would be very limited. So, but I'm thinking if that's your 17 categories would go like beyond 25%, I definitely see that you could get a completely different product. So that's why it's not then at staff's discretion to do that. The other way is also the reverse of your question is also true. So if you have 17 categories and you're complying, but only in one category you're not complying, it kicks it up, basically.
But
out of 17, 16 is okay, but one is not.
I'd rather see it either kick to council or kick to a committee. It's not a trusting staff thing. It's a wanting to make sure that we're getting more eyes on it.
Right, that's the process. I guess
So do I hear you say, council, that you would like to define certain areas related to that 10%, that's too broadly written?
I think I either need to know what those categories are, or yeah, it's too broad.
Okay.
I would have more comfort. You guys have comforted me a bit with your conversation here, and that's good. I just, and this is my ignorance of the process more than anything else probably. So
I think that would be fairly easy to define that, those areas.
Yeah, and sign ordinances, we're all terrified of sign ordinances, so that's a horrible example.
I think we'll have some more examples a little bit further in the slideshow.
Oh, thank you, I appreciate that.
Sure. Again, the overlay district board approval, they're the next step that gets, the modifications get bumped up to, and, anything between 10 and 60% of any numeric standard in the ordinance. So that could be, area of landscaping, number of parking spaces, a setback, or it could be a variety of things, but there is a list a little bit further down in here that we'll talk about a little bit more. But the concept plans that do not meet the framework plans would not qualify for this. And it cannot include changes in use, density, or height. Those are zoning requirements. Those always have to come back to you. It shall not include any waivers of the ordinance requirements. Again, those would have to come back to you. The current P&Z would be tasked to be the overlay district board. And then overlay district board recommendations would go to the council if it's over 60%. It would also include modifications to non-numeric standards. So that's something that would also come to the council. Changes in uses and density would be permitted. A lot of times that would be in the form of a zone change or a PD or possibly an SUP. Variances to the land development regulations would also, within this corridor district, would also come before you, and any appeals to the overlay district board, again, so there would be quite a few situations that would still come to council. And here's some of the standards that would be tested in any of these scenarios. These are the kind of the 5 basic standards: the location of the building or the building envelope, architectural standards, landscape standards, streetscape standards, and screening. Those are all things that, if they're measurable, we'll have to apply the 10, 60 or more percentage to. The rest of the slides kind of differentiate or kind of explain the differences between the core districts and the transition districts. I can go over those very briefly. I think most of y'all may remember that from our retreat. I think Nika did a pretty good job of explaining the differences between the two. Again, this is our map. You may recall in the original redevelopment plan there were 3, and as we went through this process, we realized that Main Street was very important, and it was a 4th one was added as part of this process. Again, as Nika said earlier, the character is more dense, more walkable. There's more streets defined for as pedestrian ways, but not all the streets. Again, this is an example of the building envelope standards that brings the buildings closer to the street to make it more walkable with wider sidewalks. The I-35 frontage road would have a little bit more leeway because it'll have a larger buffer. But in some situations, if you're redeveloping an existing site, the building is already there, and that's something we would have to apply the percentages to. This is just kind of a chart that explains the different situations. This is again to build in flexibility and to help the development community as they look into bringing development applications forward. This just kind of shows in these areas that the buildings are brought closer to the primary streets to a build-to line. Building orientation, these are examples of kind of what we would like to see, and which is one at the bottom, versus kind of turning your back to the street, because that kind of goes against having a walkable environment. Blocks and lots in the core areas are smaller lots. Very much what you kind of see is the layout and pattern you see here in Old Town, and you can see that's been successful here in the core area. Parking standards are also something that's very measurable that we can apply the different ratios to, either with a staff approval, an overlay district board approval, or going on to the city council. Again, driveways and service uses, sometimes we'll bring a variance to the council that's, a 2 or 3 foot variance. That would give some of those type of situations staff the authority to approve if they're reasonable and meet the intent of the ordinance. Architectural standards now, those are some that if there's less than 10%, something that staff could approve, and again we'll have to kind of take a look at if it's meeting the overall character and design theme for a given area. Landscape and open space standards, there may be a site being redeveloped and they may have a requirement for 8%, but they can only, with availability of land, may only be able to provide 7%. And again, that would be a 1% difference that's measurable that could be approved by staff. The streetscape standards, again, like I said, buildings are closer. There's a focus on walkability and pedestrian amenities and lighting and so forth, defining the street character. Screening is pretty universal in both the areas, very similar to what we have, but just screening loading areas, screening trash receptacles, and any mechanical or ground or roof mounted equipment. In the transition district, like I said, it's a little bit more relaxed. It's more auto related, so you won't have as much walkability, but there's still a focus on the aesthetic improvements, the looks of the buildings, the landscaping. All of those things are going to go a long way over time to improve the overall appearance of the corridor. And it also will help soften that edge. As we have more open space, we'll have more opportunities for more trees and more of the greening of the corridor. And this slide shows in red is the text that shows where the significant differences are, where the black is the commonalities between the two different districts, which is the architectural regulations and the screening. And again, this is just another chart that lays out the different setbacks along the different types of streets. We have a lot of photos with examples that show what's kind of expected and what the desired outcome will look as things redevelop and grow over time. And this also has landscape and streetscape standards and good visual examples of what's expected. And also pad site standard. It's something that we currently do not have in our current ordinances that we get a lot of questions for that from developers, and this will give them a lot more guidance than what we currently have in our existing ordinances. And a lot of examples of photos. And again, this is just kind of an overview of the differences between the two. But again, the idea is more dense, focused developments on those 4 nodes. And then as you transition away, you'll have less dense development, but still the high quality buildings and landscaping of the sites. We have more slides with examples if y'all would like to see examples how this would be applied. Other than that, I think if you have any questions, we'll be glad to.
Showing
Do they have any
examples.
questions?
I have a brief question. The overlay district, how have we included or we looked at those impacts, the secondary impacts from, I don't know what version they're calling it, but the I-35 final version 2.0 expansion or anything like that? Have we looked at what its final build is going to be like and what kind of impacts it might have on this?
Yes.
Okay, so that's all.
When we started this process, we thought there were not 2 phases, there was 1 phase, and that's how we originally looked at it.
I would just hate to recommend, hey, go ahead and tiptoe up let's move up 2 more feet and now you're in a taking. Yeah, so we're covered, good.
So I heard that we need to make some slight changes to the admin modification from Councilman Gilmore.
Just clarification.
Just clarification.
If you could show me kind of just a list, here are the things that we have discretion on, more comprehensive. I mean, if it was just those 3 things, then, okay.
I think there were those 5 things, right? That are measurable, basically.
Going the wrong way, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I'm sorry?
Did the council see the alternative standards for the big buildings like a stadium or?
Yeah, we got some examples of.
Anything of that size is gonna come through council.
Right, so
Yes.
that's not gonna be, that's not gonna have 80% basically on it. So those
Because
are
they're
the-
gonna want a lot more than just, can we do this with pine?
Yeah, these are some things that would come before you, some of these very large projects. Some examples of some alternative standards in the transition districts could be, new big boxes or lifestyle format office towers, It also could include large expanses of walls without windows, could be permitted, larger surface parking facilities along the highway. I think we have some examples in the core districts. I'm at the end, okay, there we go. Does not want to cooperate with me.
So, Council wanna hear, if we make those changes,
Slide
are you
41.
ready for us to bring this back in an ordinance format?
Yes.
Comments?
I'm fine with everything. I don't even have a concern with what Councilman Gilmore, I'm ready for it.
Well, I'm probably picking nits, I would like to see it.
I think that's
I
fairly
think I
easy
see
to
what
do.
you're getting at. You're talking about like they dance around like a nip here, and then they're all of a sudden they're above that 10% threshold.
Yeah.
But
I think he's really talking about just really defining what falls under that 10%.
Yeah, what falls under that 10% that staff, I mean, I'm, in the interest of expediting, I am offloading some of the council's decision-making onto staff. I just wanna make sure that I'm not offloading what I feel is too much.
That's fairly easy to do.
So these are basically.
Yes, slide 41. Yeah, if I can get the details, if you can explode those out to what the details are on that, that'd be awesome.
Okay.
And then, so our next process after when we clarify this, then would be, we will go to our public meetings. Basically, we do want to reach out to the stakeholders, so everybody within the corridor will get a letter for an open house meeting, so we can go through the ordinance with everybody. At the same time, we're also doing a special session for just the developers and design community, so engineers, architects, people who will be submitting plans actually. So those will be our 2 meetings before we do the public hearings for adoption purposes.
Do you want to see, you want it to come back to you before we go out, or are you comfortable with this? Yes, one more
Yes.
time?
Okay.
I'd like to see the ordinance before we go out,
Okay.
the proposed ordinance.
can
I
you
do
send me
that?
that detail also, Richard?
On the agenda.
For the,
So you
regulations?
wanna
For the
vote on
subdistrict, the detail that you sent in the,
Absolutely.
Before it goes out for the public presentation? No. Am I in that same sticky wicket?
Maybe,
Same and
yeah,
same.
you may be, you may be.
Okay.
Kind of,
This
to
is-
get your question answered. Okay.
And the approval process will, inside the district is about 1,100 parcels, and then 200 feet out is another 1,100 parcels. So we'll be notifying 2,200 property owners before going to P&Z and council.
So a question I have is, you're proposing to put this review board under P and Z. Is that for the time being, or is there any thought process in the long term to a separate group of people?
I think long-term would be P&Z.
I think that's really better than having another separate review board. They certainly have the information background to make some of these decisions, and we just think it's better to keep it in their hands.
That's fine, just making sure.
Yeah. Okay, so what I hear you saying is we'll make the changes that Councilman Gilmore requested. and
create
then-
the list. Right, I
It's
didn't
a
hear
list.
change.
It's not a
I
change.
heard a list.
Oh,
It's
you, okay,
education.
you don't want that in the ordinance?
Just a detailed list to clarify.
I wanna know what it is, and then if I'm not happy with it, then I may make a recommendation for change, but I don't think that needs to slow down. And I don't think I'll be unhappy with it, I think this is just, I'm asking for clarification.
Okay, so we'll bring that back. And then any other questions you guys might have, and then we'll move forward with the notification process that we just talked about. Yes?
I like for things just to occur.
I like to share, Mayor, I like to share.
Because I will go back to what, I won't say they were mayor, I'll say they were a council member. They didn't really care what it was, because we were gonna say no, unless it was something real big. And
inconsistency.
then everything changed.
Understand. We're trying to be careful that we have a process here that doesn't allow for that. Okay, I think I have my marching orders.
Okay. Are we down to closed session now?
We are, but I no longer need a closed session.
You don't?
Nope, had some changes today.
Okay, so are we, could
Yes,
we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved. Second.
Motion second, all those in favor, signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, say nay. Motion carries. We are adjourned.
Thank you.
I think we're scheduled for Thursday morning. I also have the APA conference I'm going to.